Hi guys, this is Mike and we're going to be going over validity and specifically using the shortcut method to solving validity. So validity means when the premises of an argument are true, the conclusion must be true. Easy enough. Therefore, when something is invalid, all that means is that there is at least one example where the premises are true and yet the conclusion is false, because that isn't a valid argument. And what this is called is the counter example. So the counter example is when the premises are true, but the conclusion is false. This is really important because when we're working these shortcut method exercises, what we're going to be looking for is a counter example. If we can successfully create a counter example for these arguments, that means they are not valid. They're an invalid argument. If you can't create a counter example, what that means is they are valid, because in the cases where all the premises are true, the conclusion is always true, which is perfect. That's a valid argument. Okay, great. So first I'll just create a little example to demonstrate how to do it. We'll start simple first. A little argument, let's say A and B is the first premise. We can say A biconditional B is the second premise. And we can say that entails A let's just say A horseshoe B. Keep it nice and simple for the first one. So first we'll set up our counter example. So going to the main connectives, we'll set the values of these sentences. And what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to assume that this argument, A and B, premise 1, A if and only if B, premise 2, entails the conclusion A horseshoe B. We're trying to assume that this is a counterexample. If we can successfully prove that it's a counterexample, then bingo, it's an invalid argument. However, if we fail to prove that it's a counterexample, if it's impossible, then that means there's no counterexample and it's valid. So simple enough, but how do we go about solving it? Okay, so first we see that we've got a true and there's only one way to make an and true, which is when A is true and B is true, when both sides are true. We've also got a false horseshoe, and there's only one way to make a horseshoe false, when the A is true and the B is false. So we can start in either one. If we say we know this has to be true and this has to be false to make a false horseshoe. Okay, that's so good. Now we've got our values, so we can fill them in. So A is true, B is false, and bam, we've got a problem here. True false makes a false biconditional, and yet it's supposed to be true. So now what we've created is a contradiction. Following the logic of this counterexample, there's a contradiction, which means there is no counterexample. So therefore, this is a valid argument. Okay, that one was pretty simple. Let's go construct another one. A or B and C. Premise 1, premise 2 could be A biconditional B or C. Premise 3 can be B biconditional C. By the way, guys, I'm just creating these off the top of my head. There's no, I'm not getting these problems from anywhere. So some of them could be more complex than I think they will, or more simple than I think they will be. We'll just have to see when we solve them. Okay, so first step, as always, set all of the atomic sentences to our correct values. So we're assuming a counterexample. So first premise would be true, second premise would be true, the conclusion would be false. Okay, so where do we start on this one? Well, so to set a biconditional true or a biconditional false, there'd be two ways to do it each time. Either both sides would be, B would be true and C would be false, or B would be false and C would be true. Both of them would get this answer. So we don't want to start there. We don't want to start there. But this is a true and, which means both sides have to be true. So this is good. This is forcing us to make a choice. So this is a good place to start. So the C is true, and the A or B is also true. So now we've got a true or, which doesn't tell us too much because there's three ways to make a true or, right? It's true, false, or both being true. So that doesn't help us much. But we've got the value of C, so that's good. So let's fill that in. So C is true, and C is true. So great, so we've got options. So first of all, we know that in order for this, now that we know what C is, we've only got one option for B. In order for this biconditional to be false, if you're following me, B has to be false. So now we know B. So with B has to be false. There we go. False true with the or is true. Okay, great. So for the biconditional to be true, we know A has to also be true. Okay, great. So we know that B is false and A is true, which makes the or true. Okay, great. So as you can see, we've gone through all of these and we haven't found a contradiction. We've successfully created a counterexample. We know that the value of A is true, the value of B is false, and the value of C is true. So we know that we've created a counterexample. We know that these are the values that create the counterexample for the specific argument, and therefore it is an invalid argument.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Okay, great. So we've got one invalid and one valid. Let's do a third one, and hopefully I can make this one a little bit harder. So I've got to start a new page. Let me just see how far I can go so I get it all in camera. Okay. So maybe we'll create an argument with three premises this time. So we'll keep using A, B, and C as our atomics because those are simple and easy to follow. So the first sentence will be A or B and C. The second premise will be B or C. The third premise will be A horseshoe C, and this will entail our conclusion, which will be B biconditional C. Okay, so now let's try to assume our counterexample. That will be true, that will be true, that will be true, conclusion false. Okay, so now let's go through and see if we have any forcings. There's three ways to make an or true. Not a good place to start. Again, three ways to make an or true. Again, three ways to make a horseshoe true. And two ways to make a biconditional false. So this is an example where we're going to have to create multiple scenarios to make sure we work through all of our options. The best place to start is the one with the least number of options. So there's two ways to make the biconditional false. So let's start there. So what are those ways? It would be true, false, and false, true. So we'll label these 1 and 2 so we can keep track of our two scenarios and not get confused. So in our first scenario, B is true and C is false, so let's fill those values in. C is false, C is false, B is true, C is false, B is true. Okay, so when C is false, and this is a true statement, the A has to be false, right? Because if the A was true, this would be false. So that's a forcing. There's only one value the A can be and have this premise be true. So we know A is false. So let's fill in our A as well and see where to go from here. So those check out. 2 false make that true. True or false makes an or true. So that checks out. That's good. Let's go to our final premise. True and false makes the and false. False and false makes an or false. So this is the problem here. We've created a contradiction, which means we haven't created a counterexample yet. However, because we have 2 options of values to use, we're not done with the problem yet, because this could still create a valid counterexample. So we don't want to count our eggs before they've hatched. We need to work through this option as well. So let's fill in our values. C is true, C is true, B is false, C is true, B is false. And I know it can get a little confusing, but make sure you're lining them up correctly, so you know what we're doing, and we're not focusing on this line anymore, we're just focusing on this line. So let's look at the first atomic sentence. So C is true, the sentence is true, so A could be true or false, so that doesn't really help us. We know this is true, so we can just check that off. Let's go to the first one. So B is false and C is true. That makes the and false. So we know this needs to be true and the and is false. So the only way that will happen is if the A is true. So that has to be true to make the R true. Okay, so now let's go fill in our A over here. So we've got true, true. True, true with a horseshoe is true. Okay, great. So all of our premises work out. There's no contradiction. That means we have created a counterexample, which means this is an invalid. Now this is a super important example, because if we had stopped after doing this first one and been like, oh no, we can't create a counterexample, we would have assumed it was valid and we would have got the problem wrong. Luckily, we went through our second option as well, and we realized that it's actually invalid, and the keg happens when A is true, B is false, and C is true. So, great. I think that's all the examples I have for you guys today. If there's any interest, I can do another one going over even more complex problems, maybe ones where you have to do 3 options, or you have to split one of these options into even more options, like say you have to split 2 into 2A and 2B. That can happen. But generally they're not going to be like that, and this should give you a great starter to solving these validity problems with the shortcut method, which is so much faster than doing it with truth tables. So thank you guys for listening to my teaching tool, and have a nice day. Bye.